Greetings and welcome to our first class together. If we were in class together live, I would ask you right off the bat, well, I'm going to do that now anyway. What is geography? Stop and think about that. Give it a minute. Pause this. Think about that, and we'll talk about that. Get to the root of geography. Okay, if you've done that, you've thought about that, you probably came up with some obvious but correct assumptions about geography. That it's about maps and it's about landforms. And every year, when I ask that opening question, those are the answers that I get. And I say that to say that you're going to find that after we get through maybe the first 3 or 4 chapters, you're going to be like, wow, man, I didn't know this was, what geography involved. And so I think you're going to be probably pleasantly surprised. Geography, it has the 5 themes to it. Location, place, man's environment uh, you know, with the land around him, environmental interaction. There's movement, and regions. And I mentioned this the other day in the syllabus video that for those of you who are going into education, the social sciences, geography is a great course to study because it has elements of all of the other social studies courses, economics, to history, to psychology, to cultures, to sociology. It has all of that, and we'll see that in this course, which I love teaching. I've been doing it for a long time. Now, if you have your anticipation guides, I'd like for you to get that out. And I think it's a great focus activity. And people like making predictions. And that's kind of what you're doing there. You could call it a prediction guide too, the anticipation guide. And I have 9 items on there. And what I'd like for you to do would be to just read the statements, and see if you agree or disagree with them. And then when we're done with the lecture, we can go back over those and see how well you predicted things. So let me give you a time to do that, and I'll break back in here. Okay, breaking back in. Now that you've filled in your anticipation guide, see how well you did at the end of the model. Let me get on our um, screen share here, and we'll make our way into the chapter 1 lecture. Some of the major heads up terms I want to talk about. First, spatial. I'm going to mention spatial a lot in this lecture, and you're going to hear about it. This will be the last time you hear about it. Spatial, a common um, term and theme in the discipline of geography. And spatially is basically places. Places become um, areas with borders. I mean, spatial is where you are looking at things like from an aerial view. All right, from an aerial view, and delimiting regions and areas. Site. We'll talk about. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. Let's go region. Region is basically sameness. Geographers look for sameness in features and patterns. Regions have boundaries, and they are frames of reference. And getting back to spatial, spatial is kind of the extent of that region. Location, and this is where all geographic study begins. Site and situation. Site and situation. Site is the physical and cultural characteristics of a specific place, where situation is, basically how does that place relate to other places. Very similar to absolute and relative location, right? Which you probably had back in maybe middle school or high school. Absolute location is the exact specific place of an area based on parallels and meridians, where absolute or relative location is very similar to site or to situation. Where you're you know looking at how a place relates to another place. Relative distance. Relative distance kind of makes sense of distance. Making sense of it. Through either time, money, or miles. Psychological distance. Psychological distance is the way someone perceives, um, perceives distance. Psychological distance. Cultural landscape. People move into certain areas since the beginning of time, and via their culture, they augment and change the way that culture, that or the environment looks. The cultural landscape. Accessibility. Accessibility. Accessibility looks at distance and looks at ways around it, ways to get around that friction of distance. Connectivity goes beyond asking the question, how can we get around it? It finds ways to do it, solutions to do it, connecting distances. And then you have your regions, right? Formal regions. Formal regions are kind of static. They're not going to change. Usually they're dubbed regions by maybe a language, a climate pattern, maybe some kind of formal laws. Functional region's a little different. Functional region um, could change. Formal regions usually don't change. Functional regions could change. Functional regions usually are thus because of some kind of an economic, becoming some kind of economic cone that connects an area up with the rest of the state or the rest of the country or even internationally. Perceptual regions are basically how do the people within the region and outside the regions look at the region. Texas, how do Texans look at Texas? How do people outside Texas look at Texas? West Virginia, how do people inside West Virginia look at it? How do people outside look at West Virginia? I'm picking on a couple of states there that have reputations, right? So the objectives for this particular chapter, we want to recognize the basic concepts for geographic study. We want to understand how geography impacts everyday life and develop an interest for further study. And, after you start studying geography and looking into it, I can't see how anyone would not want to. That's just me, I guess. I am going to have a lab. Your lab will be connected to that last objective. Let's take a look at this here. Chapter 1, Introduction, a lecture model. And I'm going to be reading some things that aren't on the lecture model just to, give some continuity to the chapter. But because I can't cover everything, I just focus on about 4, maybe 5 concepts, and that's what you're going to be quizzed on. There will be no tricks. Everything that you write in your fill in the blanks and write in notes for me, beware, that will show up again on the quiz. I'm going to be looking for it. This kind of information on your discussion questions. Your discussion questions will be based around, your lecture research. So let's take a look at this. We'll get into this right away here. Geography is the spatial science. It's a study of how and why things differ from place to place on the Earth's surface. And right away here, I'm going to get into regions, and you're filling the blanks. And your first fill of the course is the word spatial. Spatial. Spatial is basically the extent of a region or geographical extent. You know, it could be, think of some of the more well-known regions, right? The Bay Area, the Middle East. They cannot be defined without specific aerial contents, so to speak. Region is denoted by its homogeneity. That was $64 word of saying sameness. Sameness in structure. Sameness in structure. And when you're talking about structure, we're basically looking at the terrain, the climate, right? The sameness in quality. Thinking like the deep south of the United States. It's poverty. Sameness in similar parts, right? Language, a particular language group. Now the boundaries to a region may be clear. The desert in Egypt and the Nile River region mark a clear serial break between the desert sands and the lush green cultivated land near the river, and I'm told it's very clear coming into Cairo Airport in Egypt. And then you have other regions that are not so clear. I'm thinking the Pine Barrens down in the southern coast of New Jersey may not be clear. I mean, some folks see it as spreading further north and west because of the extensiveness of the pine trees, but culturally, after you get away from the coast, it changes a little bit. Start looking at location. Location is the starting point of all geographic study, and it primarily involves our personal movements and spatial actions in everyday life. Locations used in different ways. The first is absolute location. Absolute location speaks of a precise place through parallels and meridians, latitude and longitude lines, right? Relative location, that is about a place's location in relation to other places or things. For example, real estate agents. Real estate agents rely on it as they highlight spatial interconnections that carry social and economic implications, such as if the community has a library or a school or a park. Relative location can infer something as broad as a general area of the country. For instance, for example, the Iron Range in Minnesota. So in light of the ways geographers look at location, they can also make a distinction between site and situation of places. I'm going to turn now to the electronic chalkboard. And you can see there the notes to that. Site is the specific feature of a place, the physical and cultural characteristics, and the attributes. And it's more than mathematical. You know, it's more than the parallels and meridians, although it does refer to absolute location. Situation Situation refers to relative location. It asks the question, how does the place relate to other places? Absolute location deals with the numerical value given to separation between two places, for example, miles and feet, etc., etc. Relative location is, again, that's certainly more than numerical and some kind of numerical index. It gives meaningful terminology to the separation between two places, and it could do it in time, cost, right? I mean, how long is point A from point B? Well, some people will say they will give you um, the description by miles, but some people might, it's like, well, maybe $10, if it's a long distance trip or something, estimate that out in tolls. Figure 1-4 in your textbooks for you visual type learners. Figure 1-4 on page 8 gives you an interesting caption of the reality relative location, and it gives you an overhead shot of the North Pole and really how close maybe um, Canada and the U.S. were to the old Soviet Union during the Cold War. You know, looking at it from a linear perspective as a kid, I thought, hey, the Soviet during the Cold War, the Soviet Union on the other side of the other side of the world. They'd have to have a long bomb to reach us. But take a look at the reality of relative location in that connection. I was glad of what I didn't know. Take a look at distance here. Relative distance expresses spatial interconnections and interdependencies, and it helps document. It helps document how places vary from one another in their physical and cultural characteristics. Let's look at it here. The fills here. Relative distance. Relative distance transforms units such as miles or kilometers into meaningful measurements. Now, as you're thinking about that, let me turn to next last paragraph on. I think I'll save that. Things may actively seem longer or shorter than they actually are because of one's psychological outlook. And that is something I want to get into here. Your authors, I'm reading from your textbook here, to know that two competing malls are about equidistant in miles from your residence is perhaps less important in planning your shopping trip than is knowing that because of street conditions or traffic congestion, one is 5 minutes and the other 15 minutes away. For that, you can look at figure 1-6 on page 9, some travel times from downtown San Diego. Most people, in fact, as you're looking at that, I'll continue on with this. Most people, in fact, think of time distance rather than linear distance in their daily activities. For instance, downtown is 20 minutes away by bus. The library is a 5-minute walk, right? Some of you guys speak this way. In some instances, money rather than time is the distance transformation. I'm thinking you're taking a 5 hour trip, you might be thinking in terms of how much it's going to cost. An urban destination might be estimated to be a $10 cab ride away. Information that may affect either the decision to make the trip at all or the choice of the travel mode to get there. And as college students, you already know that rooms and apartments are less expensive at a greater distances away from the campus. The culture landscape, right? The culture landscape. And geographers refer to the term cultural landscape. They're talking about how humans use the land, which tells them, how the folks live. Therefore, by occupying a place, people then augment, change the way it looks. And you have to see this to believe it, but it's true. I can't skip this visual. On page 12, page 12, um, this is, bore out no better than this. Figure 110, the process of change in a cultural landscape. Figure A uh, and B are about the city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. But you can see it's figure A. In the 1960s, it was a modest, you know, sized fishing town. Go to figure B, it's discovery of oil and growth as a tax-free haven and cosmopolitan business center led to fantastic growth. Former places are hardly recognizable today. The city is home to the world's tallest building and the world's largest shopping mall, which features an indoor ski resort. Okay, just incredible. Right? The cultural landscape and how it was been changed in the United Arab Emirates, especially in probably just Dubai. Now, the amount of human interaction hinges on the type of climate or terrain that one lives in. This includes soil, mineral access, natural resources that one may dwell near, basically the physical characteristics. And these physical resources then become culturally shaped. Also, the environment, therefore, affects circumstances in many facets of life. Take a look at California and Florida. The favorable climates that we enjoy being in right now, but they have natural disasters. I mean, come May and June, we're going to be glad we're not down there with the hurricanes in Florida. Certain times of year, California gets devastated with some really big earthquakes. Some of them have had a lot of casualties. And as a result, especially California, people have actually left the state. I think it did lose population in the 90s from prior decades. I don't know about now. We'll talk about spatial interaction. The fact that places are interrelated to one another is a process and pattern of spatial interaction. And there are three concepts. There are three concepts to spatial interaction. And the first one is distance. The first one is distance. Distance, the rate and extent of interaction between places can be affected by the distance, separating the origin of a new idea. I'm thinking like musical styles, right? Musical styles began cosmopolitanly in the urban areas and then gradually make their way Maybe not so much anymore with the internet, but certainly in the past, make their way, out to the hinterlands, 90 minutes, 90 miles out. Second concept to distance is accessibility. And accessibility considers distance. It considers it, it assesses it, how easy or difficult is it to overcome the distance, those barriers of time and space, that friction of distance, right? Friction of distance where distance kind of impedes interaction. And then the third concept of distance is connectivity. So with accessibility comes connection of places via telephone lines, street and road systems, pipelines, radio and TV, the internet. Lastly, I want to get into formal and functional regions. And we'll finish up here with the electronic chalkboard. I'll just say this about that before we get there, though, that although no two areas can have exactly the same physical and cultural content, sufficient evidence of spatial similarity may exist to permit the recognition and definition of regions. Earth areas with significant elements of uniformity, sameness. So regions are the geographer's device, if you will, of aerial generalization, conceptual summaries, if you will, right? Intended to recognize the um, underlying order in the diversity of the Earth's surface. So, get the underline out of there. Get all that out of there. A region, it's a frame of reference. The region, it has limits. It has established criteria. People just don't willy nilly say, oh, this is the Mideast, this is Silicon Valley, this is the Rust Belt, right? There has to be criteria to it. And I'm just going to touch on that right now. Chapter 14, we will, which your authors do not have. I've included chapter 14 because it's about regions, my favorite subject in geography. So have your antennas up when we get there. Nevertheless, it has criteria, established criteria, such as sameness. That's really the key with regions. Sameness, certain patterns, boundaries. They have boundaries. Like I said earlier, some are clear and some are not. Some are clear, some are not. Now, there are two generalized types of regions. I'm going to mention a third, but there are two generalized types. And the first one would be a formal region, right? The formal region of essential characteristic uniformity, and then you have your functional region. The functional region, which serves as a spatial system of operational connectivity. Let's take a look at the formal region first. Formal regions. And sameness. Sameness, some kind of a single feature, such as a physical or cultural feature like the Corn Belt, with its crop characteristics, or maybe a language or some kind of structure, something very structural, formal laws. The functional region. Spheres of influence. Functional regions are spheres of influence, like trade areas or towns that act as cones of activity. These are a little more subject to change than the formal region. Silicon Valley, right? That acts as a hub of activity, but it's subject to change. I mean, I'm down in Somerset County, and I know north of us is an old steel town, Johnstown. Some of you guys are probably familiar with that, and that's changed, right? It's no longer known for that, and it's probably changed its relationship with the rest of the state, right? It's not as prevalent as a result of you know several phenomena, I guess, that happened over the past I don't know how long. Lastly, I want to talk about the perceptual region. Do it a plural since we're doing that with all these, with the former two. like I said earlier, you have, this kind of thing exists in the minds and perceptions of not only the inhabitants, but those outside of the region as well. Like, how do Texans feel about their state? Uh, it's where the true cowboys are, right? And where they came from. The Bible Belt, right? The Bible Belt, getting back to the borders and stuff too. A Bible Belt may not have clear-cut borders, although these terms have economic and cultural connotations. Um, people may have 10 different definitions and the qualities and boundaries of these regions, but these regions are, they kind of serve as regional identity, helping us sort out the world around us, right? Helping us make sense of the world. Okay, that is that for chapter 1. And you can look at your anticipation guide and see how well you did. Thinking for number 1 on the anticipation guide, the concept of spatial deals with aerial shots from the sky to study geography. Probably right? Agree with that. A region is a man-made construct. Agree. A region does not have clear boundaries. Well, we know that's not correct, right? Absolute location deals with exact addresses, whereas relative location involves the concept of general placement of an area in connection with other areas. Agree. One psyche can make riding the same route to work seem longer depending whether you are going to work or going home. That's right. Agree. The natural landscape dictates how people live. Agree. A city gang, I think I'll save 7. I didn't really touch on that now. When we get to the discussion questions, I'm going to probably swerve into something that would deal with this. Friction of distance is a term referring to how the world is becoming globalized. Not. Some regions are dubbed as such because of their laws. Agree, right? Geographic organizer. Let's wrap it up here and we'll talk about where we're going here in the very near future. Graphic organizer, what is geography, right? Spatial science. Spatial, the extent of aerial content. It's spatial science and it deals with the regions, right? Sameness in structure, quality, and similar parts. Geography's location, the starting point of all geographic study. It looks at personal movements and spatial actions. Broken down into absolute and relative location, absolute location, parallels and meridians, latitude, longitude, and that funnels down to a precise place, a site. Can refer to absolute location. Relative location, relative to other places. Broad, general areas. The situation of it. How places relate to other places. And you can think about that in terms of, I wanted to stop and mention that during a lecture, but I'll say it now. You can think about site and situation, play around with that in your own mind, how that relates to Mount Aloysius. What's the site of it? What's the situation? What's the site of your home? Right? The situation of it. I know one of the buildings I work at face to face is about a mile from a major artery going through the Laurel Highlands, a 4-lane highway. And so when I ask this question, now what's the site of the college? And they will talk about maybe the address of the place or something nearby, but the situation, the students always mention, well, we're about a mile from this highway. How places relate to other places. What is geography? It's also distance, right? Relative distance, transforming units into meaningful measurements. Yeah, there's a psychological outlook to it, right? It's psychological, your outlook. I hate going to the doctors once a year to get a checkup. Seems like it Doesn't take me too long to get there. And then coming home, it seems like it might be a little bit longer. Uh, Walking to the car in a dangerous area of town might seem longer in the evening than it does during the afternoon, right? Geography is spatial interaction. Three concepts to that: distance, the rate and extent are affected toward new ideas, depending how wide the distance is. Accessibility, how easy is it to overcome that friction of distance? And then connectivity, getting around those barriers of time and space. Geography's interaction with the environment, the cultural landscape, how the land is used, tells how people live. Climate and terrain affect the type and amount of interaction with the environment, and many facets of life can be affected, especially living some where there's a lot of cataclysmic seismic activity that goes on, right? Could force you out of an area. And then lastly, it's a frame of reference through regions. There's limits to regions, there's criteria to it, and there's types of regions. You have your formal regions, sameness, deals with sameness, cultural, physical attributes. It's static, not subject to change. Then you have your functional region, these spheres of influence, uh, trade towns acting as a hub of influence with the wider world. And then perceptual regions, the viewpoint of and about the regions. That's a wrap on that. Let's take a look at what's up ahead. There we go. Now, I had included in the syllabus a kind of a tentative schedule of when I'm going to be doing things. Mondays, well, I'll have the quiz up and ready to go. I'll have the lecture model. And then Tuesdays, I'll probably try to get some videos in there and, pardon me, some videos and maybe a reading or something. Nothing too extensive, I guess. Wednesday's the day I want you guys to practice with the lecture model material. Practice with it. And again, the hub of the wheel for those answers is the lecture. I'm really sorry to report that, right? Don't go out of bounds of that. You might Google a concept that I talked about, but it might be on some rabbit trail that I didn't teach. Okay, so stick to the script, stick to the lecture models and the lectures. In order to fill lecture models out, you've got to watch the lectures, right? So Wednesday is usually some kind of practice assignment, some kind of analytical assignment. And so Wednesday, you guys will be looking at this, I guess, on a Monday. And so Wednesday, a reading guide I'll have posted. The reading guides, I should probably say this too about the reading guides. When you download the reading guides have some items on there that say right on the page, and others are search and think items. The right on the page answers, I'm giving you the paragraph and the page number of where you can find the answer in the textbook. And the textbook's kind of geared toward the lecture model, the lecture. And there are more or less text explicit answers there. The search and think, you kind of got to read a little bit, read the text and read between the lines and get your answer there. Thursdays will be the labs, right? The labs, internet research, kind of tying together everything that we talked about in class, except for this week. This week I'm going to have you guys kind of veer off a little bit from the lecture model and look at a lab that deals with careers in geography. That'll be due Thursday night. Friday begins the discussion post section of the chapter. By Friday night, you're going to need to respond to my discussion question or discussion clusters, and because you cannot respond to anyone else until you know, post. You have your initial post. Be sure to look at the rubrics on how to do these things. I don't want you guys losing points. As I said in the syllabus video, um, the um, whether you hit certain letter grades or don't kind of can hinge on whether you follow the directions on these things. It really can. And then by Sunday night, you're going to have respond to two other people. Look at the rubric on how to do those and what not to do and your responses. And by Sunday night, 11:59, I should have those. And then on Monday, I'll have a quiz for you guys electronically. It'll be available 12:01 a.m. You'll have till 11:59 to take it in the evening. And then that same day, I will have, the train will just keep on rolling. I will have a lecture video and lecture model for maps, chapter 2. Okay. So if you have any questions, comments about that, you can get a hold of me relatively easy, and I get back relatively quickly, unless it's a Sunday, right? I'm taking that day off. So until next time, you guys have I guess you will see this on a Monday or early next week. Have a fantastic week, and all the best in your studies and certainly geography. So talk to you later.